A man stood alone in a study lined with leather-bound books he could not read. Caleb Whitmore held a land notice to the lamplight, lips moving over shapes that meant nothing. Outside, 300,000 acres of Arizona grass rolled toward the mountains, all of it his. Inside, a single sheet of paper had brought the richest man in the territory to silence. That spring of 1889, before the notice came, Hannah Bell carried a tray of coffee into the study and found him pretending. She set the cup down and said gently, "A man's worth ain't in what he shows folks, sir. It's in what he's willing to learn when no one's watching." Caleb did not answer. He thought she meant nothing by it. He did not yet know those words would outlast the coffee, the study, and very nearly the ranch itself. The Whitmore Ranch sprawled across the high country south of Prescott, a kingdom of cattle, windmills, and fences that took 2 days to ride. Caleb's father had built it from a single team of oxen and a stubbornness that became legend. When the old man died, he left his son the largest holding in the territory and one cruel inheritance. He had never sent the boy to school, believing a Whitmore learned by working, not by sitting. So Caleb had grown into a tall, broad-shouldered man of 30 who could break a horse, read the weather in a cloud, and judge a steer's weight by eye. He could not read a word. Not the brand registry, not the bank statements, not the letters that arrived each week from buyers in Kansas City and lawyers in Phoenix. He had built a system to hide it. His foreman read the cattle counts aloud. His banker assumed his silences were shrewdness. When papers required signing, Caleb studied them with a frown of false concentration, then signed the careful, practiced letters of his own name, the only word his hand had ever learned. The town of Coldwater treated him like minor royalty. Merchants saved their finest goods. Mothers steered their daughters toward the church socials he attended. Everyone agreed Caleb Whitmore was a serious, intelligent man, sparing with words because he weighed each one. The truth was simpler and lonelier. He spoke little because every conversation risked the moment someone slid a paper across a table and waited. Into this house came Hannah Bell, hired the previous autumn to keep the kitchen and the linens. She was a widow of perhaps 28, quiet and watchful, her hands roughened by work, her speech careful and clear. She had been a schoolteacher's daughter back in Ohio before drought and debt drove her west, and she carried books in her trunk the way other women carried keepsakes. The other servants found her odd. She read by candle stub after the dishes were done, and she never gossiped, which made her hard to know. Hannah noticed things. She noticed that the master of the house never read at the table. She noticed he held newspapers upside down once, then corrected himself too quickly. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when the mail came. She said nothing because it was not her place, and because she had learned that a person's shame is a fragile thing best left alone until they reach for help themselves. She did not have to wait long. It came on a gray morning in April. A notice arrived by courier, stamped with the seal of the Territorial Land Office, and Caleb carried it into the study and shut the door. Hannah came to lay the fire and found him at the desk, the paper trembling slightly in his grip, his face pale beneath its weather brown. He was staring at it the way a man stares at deep water he cannot cross. He did not hear her at first. When he did, he stood abruptly, crushing the notice against his chest. "Leave it," he said. "The fire. Leave it." But Hannah had already seen. She had seen the way his eyes did not move across the lines, the way they only hunted, lost, over the surface of the words. She set down her kindling and stood very still, and the silence between them changed into something honest. "That paper's troubling you," Hannah said. "It's nothing. Land business." Caleb turned toward the window, his back a wall. "It's from the land office. Those aren't usually nothing." She kept her voice level, the way she might speak to a spooked colt. "If you'd like, I could read it to you, so you'd know what it says before your banker tells you what he wants you to think it says." The silence stretched so long she thought he might dismiss her on the spot. She had overstepped, plainly. A servant did not offer to read a rich man's mail. She gathered her kindling to go. Wait. His voice was rough. He did not turn around. You'd not repeat it. Whatever it says, whatever you think. I keep my own counsel, sir. Always have. He turned then, and she saw the thing he had hidden from the whole territory written plain across his face. Not stupidity, but a deep and grinding shame, the kind a man carries so long it becomes part of his spine. He held out the notice. His hand was steady now, the way a hand gets steady when a man has decided to jump. Hannah read it aloud. The territorial office announced a review of water rights filings across the county. Any rancher whose original claims contained errors or lapsed renewals had 90 days to correct them, or the rights would revert and be open to reassignment. It was dense, lawyerly, deliberately hard. When she finished, Caleb was quiet a long moment. My water rights, he said slowly. If I can't answer that paper proper, men could file on my springs. It seems so. You'd need to check your original filings. Your deeds, which are in that cabinet. He looked at it the way other men look at a locked door with a fortune behind it. Words. All of it, words. Something broke loose in him, and he said the thing he had never said aloud to a living soul. I can't read them, Hannah. Not one. 30 years old and the biggest fool in Arizona can't read his own name past the signing of it. She did not gasp. She did not soften her face into pity, which he would have hated. She simply nodded as though he had told her the price of flour. Then you've two choices, she said. You can hire some lawyer who will learn all your business and own a piece of your secret forever. Or you can learn to read it yourself. I could teach you. Quiet, evenings. No one need ever know. Learn? At my age? I've taught children half your sense in a season, she said. You're not stupid, sir. You were only never shown. He stared at her for a long, long while. All right, Caleb said at last, and the words cost him everything. But understand me. Not a soul knows. Not the foreman. Not the cook. Not the priest. You teach me in this room after the house is abed, and if it ever reaches town that Caleb Whitmore sat at a servant's knee like a schoolboy, I'll. He stopped. The threat had nowhere to go. You'll what? Hannah asked, not unkindly. I'll be ruined, he said simply. They fear me because they think I'm clever. They'd not fear a man they could outwit on paper. Then we'll start tonight, she said. After the lamps go down, bring nothing but yourself and your patience. I'll bring the rest. She picked up her kindling and went to lay the fire. As if nothing had changed, everything had. There was a boy on the ranch named Eli, 9 years old, the orphaned son of a hand who had died of fever the winter before. Caleb had let him stay out of a gruffness he called practicality, and Hannah recognized as kindness. Eli swept the stables and ran messages and watched the master with open, fearless adoration. He could read a little. Hannah had begun teaching him his letters in the kitchen on Sundays. Caleb did not know this yet. He did not know that the boy's bright progress would one day shame and inspire him in equal measure, nor that the child would matter more than any contract. The first lesson was a disaster of pride. Hannah came to the study at 10:30 with a slate, a primer worn soft at the corners, and a stub of chalk. Caleb sat at his great desk like a man awaiting a tooth pulling. She set the primer before him, opened to a page of simple letters, and he looked at it and felt the old hot shame climb his neck. This is a child's book, he said. It's everyone's book to start. There's no other door in. She sat across from him, not beside, giving him the dignity of distance. We'll begin with the sounds. This one is A. For an hour he labored. His big hands, which could rope a steer at a gallop, could barely hold the chalk. His letters came out crooked and wrong. Twice he nearly stood and ended the whole foolish business. Each time, Hannah said nothing about the failure, only pointed again, patient as falling water, and said the sound once more. Why don't you laugh? He demanded finally, throwing down the chalk. Anyone would laugh. A grown man can't make an A. I've watched grown men do harder things badly their whole lives and never try to mend it, she said. There's nothing funny in a man trying again. He picked up the chalk. By the end of the first week, he knew his letters by sight, all 26, and could sound out the smallest words. It felt to him like a man recovering the use of a hand he had been born without. C-A-T. He stared at the word cat on the slate and something turned over in his chest, half wonder, half grief for all the years he had spent in the dark. The lessons settled into a rhythm. The house would quiet, the last lamp die in the bunkhouse, and Hannah would come with her primer. She taught him the way she taught children, with patience and with games, but she never once made him feel small. When he conquered a word, she did not praise him like a boy. She simply nodded and gave him a harder one, and he found he worked twice as fierce for that respect than he ever would have for flattery. She made him read the labels on the kitchen tins. She made him read the brands burned into the saddle leather. She made him copy out lines from the primer until his hand learned grace. And slowly, the world that had been a fog of meaningless marks began to resolve into sense. Signs he had ridden past 1,000 times suddenly spoke. The word Coldwater on the road marker, the word bank over the door he dreaded. He rode into town one afternoon and read 3 words off a storefront and had to stop his horse, his heart pounding like a boy's at his first dance. He grew greedy for it. He kept the primer in his coat and stole minutes with it between chores, sounding out words under his breath where the hands could not see. He began to leave little notes for Hannah in the study. Thank you, badly spelled, the letters lurching, and she would correct them gently and leave them where only he would find them. One evening, Eli came to the study door with a message and found the master bent over a child's slate. The boy's eyes went wide. Caleb stood so fast he knocked the chair. It's not what, he began, but the boy only said, Miss Hannah's teaching me too, on Sundays. I'm up to words now. He said it with such simple pride, such utter absence of judgment, that the lie died in Caleb's throat. He sat back down. After that, sometimes the 3 of them worked together by the fire, the master and the orphan side by side over their letters, and Hannah between them, and it was, though none of them said so, the warmest the great cold house had been in years. Caleb began to notice things about Hannah he had not let himself notice. The way she pushed a strand of hair back when she was thinking, the way her tired face came alive when Eli got a hard word right, the careful, mended dignity of her clothes. She had lost a husband and a home, and crossed half a country alone, and never once asked the world for pity. He, who had everything, had spent 30 years pitying himself in secret. The comparison did not flatter him, and he was honest enough to feel it. He said none of this. A man like Caleb did not say such things. But he started having the cook set aside the best of the larder for the kitchen, and he stopped riding past Hannah without a word. And these small changes were a language of their own. Spring deepened into the green Arizona summer, and Caleb learned to read. It did not come all at once, but it came. By June, he could work his way through a newspaper slowly, his finger under the lines, and by July he had stopped using his finger. He read the territorial paper at the breakfast table now, openly, and the cook assumed he had simply taken a new interest in the news, and no one thought to wonder why a man would suddenly read what he had, supposedly always read. The first time he read a full contract through without help, he did it alone in the study at midnight, a cattle sale agreement that had been sitting on his desk for a week. He read every line. He read the price and the terms and the delivery dates, and then he read the small print at the bottom, the part lawyers bury. And he found a clause that bound him to a second sale the following year at a price set by the buyer. It was a trap, a small one, the kind that had likely been slipped past him 12 times in years past. He had signed such things blind, trusting men who counted on his blindness. He sat very still. Then he took up his pen, and in his slow, careful, real handwriting, not just his signature now, but words, his own words, he wrote in the margin, "Strike this clause or I don't sign." And he understood, holding that pen, that he had taken back something far larger than a contract. He had taken back the power to know when he was being robbed. He showed it to Hannah the next night. She read his margin note and looked at him, and for the first time since the lessons began, she smiled with something more than a teacher's approval. "You caught it yourself," she said. "You taught me to. I taught you the letters. The catching was yours." She set the contract down. "You've a sharp mind, Caleb. You always did. It was only locked in a room with no key. You've the key now. No one can take it back." He had never heard her say his name without the "sir." Neither of them remarked on it. But the room felt different after. The lessons changed in nature. They were no longer about letters, but about words, about meaning, about the difference between shall and may in a legal paper, between grant and lease, between perpetuity and term. Hannah's schoolteacher father had drilled these things into her, and she gave them to Caleb the way one passes down an inheritance. He soaked it up. He had the rancher's eye for detail and the desperate hunger of a man making up for 30 lost years. He began to read his own ledgers, and what he found there made his jaw set hard. Years of small thefts, suppliers who had overcharged him, knowing he could not check the figures, a bookkeeper, long since gone, who had skimmed steadily. He did not rage. Rage was the old Caleb, the proud, frightened one. The new Caleb made lists. He made notes. He began, quietly, to set his own house in order, and for the first time in his life the great machine of the Whitmore Ranch ran under the eye of the man who owned it. Through it all, Eli flourished. The boy progressed faster than Caleb, the way children do, and there grew between the three of them an unspoken family that none of them had names for. On Sunday evenings, they read together. Hannah chose stories now, tales of voyages and inventors and far countries, and Eli would press for one more chapter, and Caleb, who had never in his life been read a story as a child, would find himself as eager as the boy, and would say, "One more, then," in a voice that fooled no one. He took to riding the far fences with the boy on Saturdays, teaching Eli the things he knew, the weather in the clouds, the weight of a steer by eye, the names of the grasses. And Eli taught him back the things he was learning faster. And they were, the man and the boy, each the other's pupil. One warm evening, sitting on the porch with the primer closed between them and the mountains going purple in the west, Caleb said to Hannah, almost gruffly, "I don't know what I was before you came. Some kind of fool in a fine coat." "You weren't a fool," she said. "You were alone. There's a difference, and it isn't your fault which one you were." He looked at her for a long moment. He had a great many things he wanted to say, and the words for none of them, though he had words for almost everything else now. So he said nothing, and watched the mountains, and was content in a way he had forgotten was possible. It was in late July, reading the territorial paper at his own table, that Caleb saw the notice. A public announcement. The Water Rights Review had entered its final stage. A consortium of investors, the Coldwater Land and Cattle Company, had filed petitions on several county springs they claimed had lapsed or been improperly recorded. Among the springs named was Whitmore Springs, the great cold source that watered the heart of his ranch, and without which the whole kingdom was so much dry grass. He read it twice to be sure. Then he understood the trap he had nearly walked into. The April notice had not been routine. Someone had known about his weakness. Someone had been counting on a rich man who could not read his own deeds defending them. The Coldwater Land and Cattle Company had a respectable office on the main street, and a respectable man at the head of it named Silas Pruitt. Pruitt was a banker turned speculator, soft-spoken and smiling, with a watch chain across his vest and a way of seeming to do a man a favor while picking his pocket. He had come west 5 years before with Eastern money behind him, and he had been buying up water and land across the county, with the patience of a man who understood that, in Arizona, whoever held the water held everything. He had long admired the Whitmore Ranch. He had long believed its owner to be a slow, silent man who signed what was put before him. Caleb rode into town the morning after he saw the notice and walked to Pruitt's office without knocking. Pruitt rose, all warmth. "Mr. Whitmore, an honor. Sit, coffee? You filed on my springs. Now there's been some confusion, I think." Pruitt spread his hands. The Territorial Review turned up irregularities in a number of old filings. "Your father, God rest him, was a great cattleman, but not, shall we say, a great keeper of papers. Several of the Whitmore water claims were never properly renewed under the new Code of '84. Technically, legally, those rights have lapsed. My company has simply filed to bring them into proper order. Into your hands, you mean. Into responsible hands while the matter is sorted. I'm sure it can all be worked out. In fact, and here Pruitt slid a paper across the desk, smiling, I've had my lawyers draft an arrangement that would protect you. You'd lease back the use of the springs from the company, a modest annual fee. You'd keep your cattle watered, and the legal burden of the filings would be ours. Many ranchers in your position would find it a relief. There it was, the old trap, the paper slid across the table, the smiling man waiting for the silent rich fool to frown and sign. 6 months before, Caleb would have stared at it, lost, and trusted Pruitt's account of what it said, and signed away the heart of his ranch for a yearly rent on his own water. Now he picked it up, and he read it. He read it slowly, his finger nowhere near the lines, his face giving away nothing while Pruitt watched with the patient confidence of a spider. He read past the soothing first paragraphs to the body of the thing, and he found in the careful lawyer's language that the lease was no lease at all. It was a transfer. Signing it would acknowledge, in writing, that the Whitmore water rights had lapsed and now belonged to the Coldwater Company, and the modest annual fee rose by a clause on the third page, to a sum that within 4 years would exceed what the entire ranch earned. It was designed to take the water first and the land after. When Caleb could no longer pay, he set the paper down. He kept his face still, but something cold and clear had settled in him. That's a generous offer, Caleb said. Pruitt's smile widened. I'm a reasonable man. I'll want to study it a few days. The smile flickered, just slightly. Of course, though I'd caution against delay. The review closes in 3 weeks. After that, the lapsed rights revert and are open to public reassignment. And then I'm afraid even my goodwill couldn't hold them for you. Other parties would file. It could become a very ugly fight, with lawyers and you the disadvantaged party lacking proper documentation. Whereas this, he tapped the paper, this is so simple. Simple, Caleb agreed. I'll bring it back signed or not by week's end. He rode home with the paper in his coat and a fire in him he had not felt before. They had built the whole scheme on one belief, that he could not read. That belief had been true for 30 years. It was not true anymore. But Pruitt did not know that, and Caleb, riding through his own gold grass under his own wide sky, began for the first time in his life to think like a man who could fight on paper, the only field that had ever defeated him. That night, Caleb spread everything across the study desk. The lease, the April notice, the territorial code, and the cabinet full of his father's old filings that he had never been able to read. Hannah and Eli came after the house quieted. The three of them worked till the lamp guttered. If the rights truly lapsed, Hannah said, reading the code by lamplight, then he may have the law on his side, scheme or not. The question is whether they lapsed, whether your father renewed them. I never saw him do paperwork, Caleb said, but he wasn't a careless man, tight as bark on a tree. It's hard to believe he'd let his own water slip. They dug into the cabinet. It was a chaos of 40 years. Deeds and bills and letters jammed together with no order. Because the man who filed them had also never been able to read them, Caleb realized with a jolt his father had hidden the same secret, had passed it down like a curse. The two of them generations of silent men signing what they could not read. The understanding sat heavy in him. His father had not failed to school him out of cruelty. He had been ashamed to admit there was anything to learn. For 3 nights they searched. Caleb read now with real speed, and he read every paper in that cabinet, and slowly a picture formed. His father had renewed the water rights. Caleb found the receipts, fees paid to the territorial office in 1884, the very year of the new code, for the renewal of all Whitmore claims. The old man had done it right. But the receipts were only Caleb's copies. The official record, the filing itself, was held at the land office in Prescott, And if that record had been lost, or Caleb's jaw tightened, altered, then his copies might not be enough to stand alone. Pruitt's a director of the Territorial Bank, Hannah said quietly, and the land office clerk in Prescott Bank's there. I've heard the cook's sister talk of it. The implication sat in the room. A record that should have protected Caleb might have quietly vanished from the official file, leaving only these copies in a cabinet everyone believed their owner could not read. Thence it's my word and these papers against his money and his friends, Caleb said. It's more than your word. Hannah laid the receipts in a row. Its dates, its fees paid, stamped, recorded by the bank that took the payment. Even if the land office record is gone, the bank's own ledger would show your father's payment in '84, made out to the Territorial Office for Water Renewals. Pruitt's Bank. The very ledger would convict the scheme. Caleb looked at her. You think like a lawyer. I think like a schoolteacher's daughter who watched her own father lose a farm to men who knew he couldn't fight on paper, Hannah said, and for once her steadiness cracked, just slightly, and Caleb saw the old wound under it. I won't watch it happen again. Not to you. Not after all this. In the days that followed, Caleb moved carefully. He rode to Prescott himself and asked politely to see the public record of the Whitmore water filings. The clerk, sweating, said the teen '84 renewals could not be located. A gap in the file, most regrettable. These old records, you understand. Caleb thanked him and left without showing his hand. The missing record told him everything. The scheme was real, and it reached into the land office itself. He understood now what he was up against. Pruitt held the public record, or had made it disappear. Pruitt held the friendship of the clerk and the bank and half the men of standing in the county. Pruitt held 3 weeks of clock before the rights reverted. And Pruitt held the unshakable belief that Caleb Whitmore was a man who could not read, a man who would, in the end, sit down at a table, frown at a paper he didn't understand, and sign. Against all this, Caleb held a cabinet of receipts, a teacher who thought like a lawyer, an orphaned boy, and a secret of his own, that the fool everyone meant to rob could now read every word they'd written to rob him with. He thought it might be enough. He was about to learn how much it would cost to find out. The blow came for days before the review closed. Caleb rode to the bank in Coldwater to request the 1884 ledger, the record of his father's renewal payment, the one piece of proof outside the missing file. The manager, a Pruitt man, regretted to inform him that the ledgers prior to 1886 had been sent east for archival and were unavailable. Indefinitely. So sorry. That evening, a second letter arrived. The Coldwater Company, citing Caleb's failure to sign the generous lease, had formally petitioned the Territorial Office to declare the Whitmore water rights lapsed and reassign them. A hearing was set. 3 days off. Public. Caleb sat in the study with the letter in his steady reading hands, and for the first time understood that knowing the truth was not the same as being able to prove it. He did not light the lamp. He sat in the dark study where 6 months before he had stared helpless at a paper he could not read, and he felt the old helplessness creep back in a new shape. He could read every word now. It had not saved him. The truth was in his hands, and the men who meant to take his water had simply hidden every paper that might prove it. Hannah found him there near midnight. She did not turn up the lamp either. She sat across from him in the dark the way she had that first night. They've taken the ledger, he said. The record in Prescott's gone. It's a public hearing in 3 days, and I've nothing but copies any judge could. Call forgeries. They built it all on me being a fool, and maybe I still am. A fool who learned his letters too late. You're tired, Hannah said. Tired men think the wall has no door. There's no door, Hannah. I read the law. The burden's on me to prove the renewal. The proof's been made to vanish. She was quiet a long while. Then she said, when my father lost his farm, he gave up the night before the hearing, just like this. Sat in the dark and decided it was already lost. And it was because he didn't go, because he let their silence be the only voice in the room. She leaned forward. You can read now, Caleb. So can the boy. The question is whether you'll go and read aloud." Caleb lifted his head. "The bank's copy of the ledger may be gone east," Hannah said, "but your father made a payment in '84 to the territorial office. Money like that leaves more than one track. The county recorder stamps every fee paid to the territory. It's a separate book in the courthouse, not the bank, not the land office. Pruitt may not have thought of it. Most men who can't read don't know how many books a single payment touches. But I do. My father taught me. And there's 3 days to find it." Caleb stood. In the dark, his voice was steady. "Then we ride to the courthouse at dawn." They rode through the night and reached the county courthouse at Prescott when it opened. Caleb, Hannah, and Eli. The boy had refused to be left behind, and Caleb had found he could not bear to leave him. The recorder was an old, deaf, honest man named Abernathy, who had held his post through 4 administrations and owed Pruitt nothing, owing nobody anything being the chief pleasure of his life. Caleb asked to see the fee receipt book for 1884. Abernathy brought it without question. It was a public record, and few ever asked for it because few knew it existed. They carried the great ledger to a window and opened it, and Hannah and Caleb bent over the columns together while Eli watched the door. It took 2 hours. The book was a wilderness of cramped figures, but Caleb read now, and read carefully, and it was Caleb himself who found it. A line dated the 11th of September, 1884. Whitmore, J. Territorial water rights renewal. All claims. Fee paid in full, and the recorder's stamp beside it, and the initials of the clerk who had taken the money 42 years of dust ago. The payment Pruitt had erased from the bank, and the land office had left its track here, in a book Pruitt had never imagined a Whitmore could read. Caleb sat back. For a moment he could not speak. "That's it," Hannah said softly. "That's the proof, stamped by the county in the county's own hand. No one can call that a forgery." They had Abernathy make a certified copy under his seal, which the old man did gladly, stamping it with the heavy relish of a man who liked his stamp. Then they rode home with it, and Caleb did not sleep, but spent the last night before the hearing, reading every line of the Territorial Water Code until he could have recited it. The hearing was held in the meeting hall in Coldwater, and half the town came because word had spread that the great Whitmore Ranch was in trouble, and there is no entertainment in a small town like the fall of a tall man. The territorial commissioner sat at a table at the front. Pruitt sat with his lawyers, polished and serene. When Caleb came in with a servant woman and an orphan boy and no lawyer at all, a murmur ran through the hall, and Pruitt permitted himself a small, pitying smile. The commissioner called the matter. Pruitt's lawyer rose and laid out the case smoothly. The Whitmore water rights had lapsed for failure to renew under the 1884 code. The official record showed no renewal. The company had filed properly. The rights should be reassigned. He produced the gap in the land office file like a conjurer. It was clean, and it was practiced, and when he sat down the hall, believed it. "Mr. Whitmore," the commissioner said, "you contest this. Have you counsel?" "No, sir," Caleb said, rising. "I'll speak for myself." The smile on Pruitt's face settled in deeper. This was the part he had built the whole scheme upon. The silent rich man, alone, with no papers he could read, undone in public. Caleb walked to the front. He had a folder under his arm. He set it on the table. "Mr. Pruitt's lawyer says my father never renewed his water rights," Caleb said. His voice carried, slow and clear, to the back of the hall. "He says the record shows nothing. He's right that the land office file is empty. It's empty because the renewal was taken out of it. The bank ledger that would have shown my father's payment has gone east, conveniently this very month. Mr. Pruitt is a director of that bank." Pruitt's lawyer was on his feet. Speculation. The man's grasping. "He has no record because there is no record." "There's a record," Caleb said. He opened the folder. And then, and this was the thing the whole town would speak of for years. Caleb Whitmore, the man they had all believed read everything and said nothing, began to read aloud. He read the certified copy from the county recorder's fee book, slow and steady and sure, Every word, the date and the name and the words renewal, all claims, fee paid in full, and the recorder's seal. He read it the way a man reads who has fought hard for every letter and knows the worth of each one. The hall went silent. Pruitt's smile was gone. "This is the county's own book," Caleb said, holding up the seal, "stamped by the recorder Abernathy, who's served 30 years and never met Mr. Prettit. The payment's there because it was made. My father renewed every water right on the Whitmore land in September of '84. The land office record was lost. The bank ledger was sent away, but the county's book stayed where it was, and any man here can ride to Prescott and read it for himself." The commissioner took the copy. He examined the seal. He examined it a long time. Pruitt's lawyer began to speak, and the commissioner raised a hand for silence. "This is a certified county record," the commissioner said. "It shows the renewal Mr. Pruitt's petition claims never happened." He looked at Pruitt over his spectacles, and his voice cooled. "It also raises a question of how an official land office record and a bank ledger both came to be missing in a matter where Mr. Pruitt's company stood to gain. That question will be looked into by the territory." It was over very quickly after that. The petition was dismissed. The Whitmore water rights were affirmed and ordered properly recorded under the commissioner's own hand, beyond any future tampering. And the question of the missing records followed Silas Pruitt out of that hall and, in the months to come, out of the county entirely, his fine schemes unraveling once men knew to pull the threads. But the moment the town remembered was not Pruitt's fall. It was the sight of Caleb Whitmore standing at the front of the hall, reading aloud, strong and unhurried, every word his own. They had feared him because they thought him clever. Now they had seen him fight on the one field where he had been weakest, and win, and they did not fear him after that. They respected him, which is a better thing and harder won. As the hall emptied, Caleb turned and found Hannah at the back with Eli beside her, both of them watching him. He crossed the room to them through the crowd, and he did not care who saw. A year later, a man stood in a study lined with books and read. Caleb Whitmore held the territorial paper to the morning light and read it through, easy as breathing, while across the desk a boy of 10 worked his letters, and a woman who was no longer a servant, but the lady of the house, looked up from her own book and smiled. On the wall hung a framed page, the first words Caleb had ever written in his own hand, badly spelled, "Thank you." Outside, 300,000 acres rolled toward the mountains, all of it his. Inside, every paper in the house could be read by the man who owned it, and he had been taught, one word at a time, by the woman he had married.